My phone lit up the cramped, dark room at 11 at night. The message from my husband showed him toasting his young coworker in a wedding dress. He wrote that he had married her and the locks were changed. I did not scream. I simply turned off the screen and slept. But when I woke up to the heavy pounding of police on the door, my husband realized his text was not a victory lap, but a death sentence for his fake life. My name is Alara Vance, and at 32 years old, I sat on the edge of a sagging mattress that smelled faintly of mothballs and damp wool. The peeling wallpaper of the bedroom was a faded yellow, illuminated only by the streetlights filtering through the grime of the window pane. This was my grandmother's apartment in the deep south suburbs of Chicago, a place where the sirens wailed more often than the birds sang. It was a far cry from the life everyone thought I lived, and miles away from the lies I had allowed to fester for 5 years. The vibration of my phone against the hollow wood of the nightstand sounded like a chainsaw in the heavy silence. It was 11 at night. The screen lit up, blinding me for a second before my eyes adjusted to the notification. It was from Julian. I did not swipe to open it immediately. A cold knot formed in my stomach, not of fear, but of anticipation. When I finally pressed my thumb to the glass, the image loaded with agonizing slowness due to the poor signal in the building. It was a photograph. My husband, Julian Thorne, was standing in the center of our living room, the penthouse I had designed with my own hands. But he was not alone. He was holding a crystal champagne flute high in a toast, his other arm wrapped tightly around the waist of Sienna Blake. She was 24, a junior associate at his firm, and she was wearing a white lace dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown. They were laughing, their faces flushed with expensive liquor and adrenaline. The text below the image was brief, brutal, and devoid of humanity. "We are soulmates. I married Sienna tonight. Do not come home. The locks have been changed. My lawyer will contact you." A normal woman might have thrown the phone against the wall. A normal wife might have screamed until her throat bled or dialed the number immediately to scream obscenities at the man who had promised to love her until death. I did neither. I sat perfectly still. My breathing did not hitch. My heart rate did not spike. I simply stared at the pixels, my eyes tracing the familiar curve of the sofa behind them and the artwork I had curated for his promotion party last year. The irony was bitter on my tongue. I was a licensed architect, a woman who could visualize structures and foundations better than anyone. Yet I had spent the last half-decade making myself small so Julian could feel big. I had stepped back into the shadows, ghostwriting his proposals and fixing his disastrous spreadsheet so he could climb the ladder to become a director at Sterling Corp. I had built him, brick by brick, and now he was standing in the house I paid for, celebrating his victory with a girl who had likely never worked a hard day in her life. The contrast between the world in that phone and the room I sat in was sharp enough to cut skin. In the photo, there was gold leaf and imported marble. Here, there was a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a spreading bruise and the sound of a dripping faucet from the kitchen. The floorboards creaked behind me. I did not turn around. I knew the cadence of those footsteps. Nana Rose stood in the doorway. At 75, she looked frail to the outside world, wrapped in a hand-knitted shawl that had seen better decades. Julian often mocked her when we were alone, calling her a senile burden and a poor old woman who smelled of poverty. He refused to let her visit the penthouse, claiming she would ruin the aesthetic. She walked over to the bed, her movements slow but deliberate. She reached out and took the phone from my unresisting hand. She looked at the screen, studying the smiling faces of my husband and his mistress. She did not gasp. She did not look shocked. She looked up at me, her eyes clear and sharp in the dim light. A small, knowing smile played on her lips, a smile that would have terrified Julian if he had the intelligence to understand it. "Well," she whispered, her voice rasping slightly, "it is time we stop acting, isn't it? My dear." I took the phone back from her. I did not type a reply. I did not ask why. I did not give him the satisfaction of a single question mark. I held down the power button and watched the screen fade to black, cutting off the window to his triumphant little party. I lay back on the lumpy pillow and pulled the thin quilt up to my chin. Julian expected a war. He expected me to be pounding on the door, begging to be let in, making a scene that he could use to paint me as the crazy, jealous ex-wife. Instead, I gave him silence. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me, my mind already organizing the files, the dates, and the numbers. I slept the deep, restful sleep of a woman who knows that while he might have the locks, I held the keys to his entire existence. The silence of the room dragged me back 5 years, forcing me to relive the slow, surgical dismantling of my life. I met Julian when he was nothing more than a junior sales associate with a cheap suit and a desperate hunger in his eyes. He had ambition, certainly, but he lacked the vision to execute it. I remember the nights he would come to my small apartment, pacing the floor, his hair a mess, terrifyingly afraid of losing his job. I can't make these numbers make sense," he would stammer, tossing a stack of papers onto my coffee table. "They're going to fire me. Ilara, I just know it. I was an architect. I understood structure, flow, and presentation better than he ever could. So, out of love, I picked up his mess, I redesigned his pitch decks, corrected his financial projections, and gave his chaotic ideas a polished, professional veneer. When he won Employee of the Month for the first time, he didn't thank me. He just hugged me and said, 'We did it, babe. We are going to be huge.' I did not realize then that 'we' meant he. Our wedding was the first red flag I chose to ignore. It was a courthouse affair, barely lasting 15 minutes. I had dreamed of a small garden ceremony, but Julian shut it down with a kiss and a logical explanation. "Ilara, listen to me," he had said, holding my face in his hands. "Why would we waste $20,000 on a party for people we barely like? We need to save for the future. For our empire." I nodded, feeling guilty for being selfish. I wore a simple white dress I bought on sale for $80. He didn't even buy me a ring. He promised he would get me a massive diamond once he made director. I was so naive. It wasn't about saving money. He just did not want to invest in a woman he already viewed as a stepping stone. The cruelty escalated when we moved into the penthouse. It was a space I had designed in my head 1,000 times. But once we were inside, Julian treated it like a museum where I was merely a clumsy visitor. His disdain for my past, and specifically for Nana Rose, became toxic. I remember suggesting that Nana come over for Sunday dinner shortly after we unpacked. Julian looked up from his tablet, his face twisting into a sneer of pure disgust. Here, he laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Ilara, look around you. This is Italian marble. That is a $10,000 rug. Your grandmother lives on welfare. She smells like cheap soup and old age. She is not coming here to dirty my sanctuary." She raised me. "Julian," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Then go visit her in that rat hole she calls a home," he snapped, turning back to his screen. "But do not bring that energy into my house." So I did. I learned to lie. I visited Nana in secret, scrubbing the scent of her poverty off my skin before I returned to the penthouse, terrified he would smell her love on me and punish me with his silence. As his career skyrocketed, fueled by the work I continued to do for him in the shadows, he changed. He started coming home at 2 in the morning, smelling of expensive cologne and indifference. When I tried to talk to him, he would look at me with eyes that were glazed over with arrogance. "You look tired," he would say, scanning my face as if looking for a flaw in a product. "Maybe you should hit the gym more. The wives of my partners are all tight. You are letting yourself go." I began to feel small in the massive home. He took control of the bank accounts, claiming I was too emotional to handle the finances of a high-net-worth household. I had to ask him for grocery money. I had to justify every dollar I spent on myself. When I confronted him about his late nights, he turned it back on me, a masterclass in manipulation. "You are crazy," he would say, shaking his head with mock pity. "I am out there killing myself to give you this life, and you sit here inventing stories. You need help. Ilara, you are becoming paranoid." I started to believe him. I spent nights crying in the guest bathroom, wondering if I really was ungrateful, if I really was the problem. I did not realize until tonight that I wasn't losing my mind. I was just being erased, slowly and methodically, to make room for someone newer, younger, and easier to control. I was no longer his wife. I was just an old piece of furniture he was waiting to drag to the curb. Sienna Blake did not walk into our lives. She slithered in wearing 6-inch heels and a smile that never quite reached her predatory eyes. She was 24, fresh out of college, and possessed a hunger for status that made my stomach churn. Julian introduced her as his indispensable assistant, a title that apparently required her to be glued to his side 18 hours a day. The humiliation began in earnest at our own dining table. Julian insisted on bringing her home one evening to finish up a critical project. Instead of working, they sat at the mahogany table laughing over wine while I plated the food in the kitchen. I felt less like a wife and more like a servant in the home I had designed. "Ilara, could you refill my glass?" Julian asked without looking at me. He was too busy showing Sienna something on his phone. Sienna looked up at me, her eyes glinting with malice as she swirled her Cabernet. "Oh, thank you. Ilara, you are so domestic. I do not know how you do it." "I would die of boredom if I stayed home all day doing laundry and cooking." "It isn't boring," I said, my grip tightening on the neck of the wine bottle. It is what it is." Julian cut me off, his voice sharp. "Sienna is right. She is out there closing deals. Ilara, she is modern. She is sharp. Well, you are good at this." He gestured dismissively at the roast chicken, reducing my entire existence to a meal. The attacks grew bolder and more personal. I found a smear of bright red lipstick on his collar, a shade I never wore. When I held the shirt up to him, shaking, he didn't even blink. We were crowded in the elevator. "Ilara," he scoffed, grabbing the shirt from my hands. "Stop looking for drama where there is none. You are acting like a crazy, jealous housewife. It is pathetic." Sienna even began sending me messages late at night from unknown numbers, photos of her legs resting on a dashboard I recognized as Julian's car, but she would unsent them before I could take a screenshot. When I tried to tell Julian, he looked at the ceiling with cold pity. "You are hearing things. You are seeing things. Maybe you need medication," he said, tapping his temple. "Sienna respects you. She looks up to you. You are becoming paranoid." The breaking point came when I saw the bank notification. $50,000, gone from our joint savings account. I confronted him, shaking with rage. "You spent $50,000 on a car." For her, I demanded. "It is a performance bonus," Julian shouted back, slamming his hand on the marble counter. "She doubled our sales this quarter. It is a company expense." "God, Ilara, do you ever stop nagging? You contribute nothing to this household financially, yet you want to control how I run my business. I tried one last time to save us." I swallowed my pride and suggested marriage counseling. I begged him to talk to someone with me. He laughed in my face, a cruel, barking sound that echoed in the high ceilings. "I do not need a shrink," he sneered. "I need a wife who isn't a burden." 1 week before the text message arrived, he came to me with a stack of papers. His demeanor had shifted. He was calm, almost sweet. "Babe, with the promotion, the company requires updated life insurance policies." He lied smoothly, sliding a pen into my hand. "I need you to sign these waivers. It just separates the business liabilities from our personal assets." "Standard procedure." I looked at the dense legal jargon. I hesitated, but the exhaustion of fighting him was too heavy, and I just wanted peace. I signed. I signed away my rights. Or so he thought. 2 days later, he came home early with a look of faux concern plastered on his face. "Ilara, I heard from a neighbor that your grandmother is doing poorly," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "She needs you. You should go stay with her for a while. Pack a bag. Go be a good granddaughter. I will hold down the fort here." It was not a suggestion. It was an order. I packed a small suitcase, feeling the walls of the penthouse closing in on me. As I walked out the door, Julian did not kiss me goodbye. He was already texting someone, a smirk playing on his lips. I walked to the elevator, my heart heavy with a sickening realization. He was not sending me to care for Nana. He was clearing the stage for his new leading lady. But as the elevator doors closed, I knew one thing for certain: the play was not over yet. The morning sun filtered through the yellowed blinds of Nana's kitchen, casting stripes of light across the cracked linoleum floor. I sat at the small table, staring into a mug of black coffee, the steam rising and vanishing just like my marriage. My phone sat on the table, face down, a silent brick containing the evidence of my humiliation. I expected Nana to offer me oatmeal and platitudes about how time heals all wounds. Instead, she placed a thick, leather-bound folder on the table with a thud that rattled the spoons. "Drink your coffee, Ilara," Nana said, her voice devoid of the wavering tremble she usually affected. "You are going to need the caffeine." I looked up. The grandmother who shuffled around in knitted shawls was gone. In her place stood a woman with a spine of steel, her eyes sharp and calculating. She sat down opposite me, not with the heaviness of age, but with the posture of a boardroom executive. "Nana," I asked, confused. "Julian calls me a senile. Poor old woman," she said, a dry smile touching her lips. "He believes what he sees because he is shallow. He sees a rundown apartment and assumes poverty. He does not know that I choose to live simply because I despise waste. And he certainly does not know that my full name is Rose Sterling." My breath hitched. Sterling, as in Sterling Corporation. "The very same," she replied calmly. Opening the folder, "I founded the company 40 years ago. I stepped back into the shadows to let the board run things, and to teach my family the value of hard work. I wanted you to build your own way." "Ilara, but I never intended for you to be trampled by a man with more ambition than intelligence." My mind was reeling. Sterling Corp was the parent company of the firm where Julian worked. It was the titan of real estate in the state. But the penthouse. I stammered, trying to piece the puzzle together. "Julian bought it. He showed me the deed. We celebrated for a week." Nana laughed, a low, throaty sound. "Julian signed a lease. Ilara, a very complex, very long-term lease with a shell company I own. He did not read the fine print because he is arrogant, and because his lawyer, who has been on my payroll for 20 years, told him it was a standard ownership contract. He owns nothing. The walls, the floors, the furniture. They all belong to me." She slid a document across the table. It was a bank statement, but not one I recognized. "And the cars. The company credit cards he flashes around to impress that girl." Nana continued, tapping a manicured nail on the paper, "all authorized by my finance department. And I have been watching him, Ilara, for 3 years. I have tracked every penny." I looked at the numbers. They were staggering. "He has been siphoning money," I whispered, realizing the horror of it. "He has been stealing from the company to pay for our lifestyle, to pay for her. $5 million, to be exact," Nana corrected me. "He has been falsifying expense reports and diverting funds to a dummy corporation he set up for Sienna. He thinks he is a genius. In reality, he has been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that even a blind pigeon could follow." I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a surge of cold, hard anger. Julian wasn't just a cheater, he was a thief, He had built a castle on a foundation of sand, and he had treated me like dirt while spending money that belonged to my own grandmother. The text message he sent you last night was the final mistake, Nana said, closing the folder with a snap. His contract has a strict morality clause. By claiming to be married to a subordinate, even if it is just a symbolic ceremony or a lie, he has violated his fiduciary duty. He handed us his head on a silver platter. I looked at her. Really looked at her. And for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like the victim. I felt the blood returning to my veins. I sat up straighter. The tears that had been threatening to fall evaporated. So, what do? I asked, my voice steady. Do I text him back? Do I tell him I know? Nana stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the police cruisers that were silently pulling up to the curb below, followed by a sleek black sedan. No, she said, turning back to me with a fierce glint in her eyes. You do absolutely nothing. You do not give him the dignity of a response. He expects a crying wife. We are going to give him a criminal investigation. She reached out and squeezed my shoulder. She looked me deep in the eyes, speaking firmly in our native tongue before switching back to English. Let the law answer. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the world exploded. A fist pounded against the front door of the small wooden house, shaking the thin walls and rattling the framed pictures in the hallway. I jolted awake, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a split second, I forgot where I was, reaching out for Julian's side of the bed, but my hand met only cold, damp air. Then the memory of the text message crashed down on me, followed immediately by another thunderous series of knocks. Police opened the door. A deep voice boomed from outside. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold floorboards. My stomach dropped. The phrase from my own life's headline flashed through my mind, woke up to police at my door. I crept to the front window and peeled back the edge of the dusty curtain. My blood ran cold. 2 police cruisers were parked at jagged angles on the lawn, their lights flashing silently in the gray morning mist. Behind them sat a sleek, black luxury sedan with tinted windows, looking like a shark swimming among minnows. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my throat. Julian. It had to be Julian. He was a director at Sterling Corp. He had connections, money, and influence. I was just a housewife with no income and a grandmother living on the poverty line. My mind raced through the terrifying possibilities. Had he planted drugs in my suitcase? Had he accused me of stealing his watch? Had he fabricated some insanity plea to have me committed? I was sure he had found a way to finish me off, to lock me away so he could enjoy his new life with Sienna without looking over his shoulder. I heard the lock click. Nana was opening the door. No, Nana, don't, I whispered frantically, rushing into the living room, but it was too late. The door swung open, revealing a towering sheriff in full uniform. He stepped across the threshold, his face grim and serious. I backed away until my spine hit the wall, my hands trembling. I held them out slightly, wrists together, resigning myself to the metal click of handcuffs. I closed my eyes, waiting for him to read me my rights, waiting for the humiliation to be complete. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," the sheriff said. My eyes snapped open. He was not looking at me. He had removed his hat and was bowing his head respectfully toward Nana Rose. "The escort team is ready," the sheriff continued, his voice dropping the harsh command tone and replacing it with deference. "We have secured the perimeter. Mr. Thorne is still at the residence, and we have units on standby to execute the warrant." I blinked, the air rushing back into my lungs. "Warrant?" I managed to choke out. The sheriff turned to me, his expression softening. "For Mr. Thorne, ma'am. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny. We are here to ensure you and Ms. Sterling arrive at the penthouse safely to oversee the asset seizure." The black sedan's door opened, and a man in a sharp gray suit stepped out, carrying a briefcase. I recognized him instantly. It was Arthur Penhaligon, the most ruthless corporate litigator in the city. He walked up the crumbling steps and nodded to Nana. "The eviction notice is drafted, Rose," Arthur said smoothly, "and the restraining orders are ready to be served. Shall we?" Nana turned to me. She pointed to a garment bag hanging on the back of the coat rack, something I had not noticed in my panic. "Go get changed, Ilara," Nana commanded, her voice firm. "You are not walking in there as his wife. You are walking in as his landlord and his judge." I unzipped the bag. Inside hung a tailored navy blue power suit, crisp and sharp, the kind I used to wear when I was an architect leading pitch meetings, before Julian convinced me that my place was in his shadow. I stripped off my old oversized t-shirt and stepped into the trousers. They fit perfectly. I buttoned the blazer, and as I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, the terrified woman from 5 minutes ago was gone. I walked out the front door, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the porch. The neighbors were peeking out from behind their blinds, watching as the sheriff held the door of the black sedan open for me. I slid into the leather interior, the smell of new car and justice filling my senses. As the convoy began to move, rolling away from the slums and heading toward the glittering skyline of the city center, I looked out the window. Julian was sleeping in a bed he thought he owned, next to a woman he thought he loved, believing he had won. He had no idea that the storm was not coming from the clouds. It was coming from the back seat of a black sedan, and it was wearing a navy blue suit. I later learned from the humiliating deposition Sienna gave to the authorities exactly how that morning unfolded inside the penthouse while I was on my way to reclaim it. Inside the master bedroom, the air was thick with the stale smell of expensive champagne and the musk of betrayal. Julian and Sienna had slept in, sprawling across the Egyptian cotton sheets I had picked out for our anniversary. When they finally stirred, the sun was already high over the city. Sienna didn't even bother to dress. She slid out of bed and walked to my closet, her fingers trailing over my clothes as if she were shopping in a boutique where everything was free. She pulled out my favorite emerald green silk robe, a gift from my mother before she passed away, and wrapped it around her body. "This feels expensive," she purred, walking into the living room and kicking aside an empty bottle of Dom Perignon. "I think I am going to throw out everything else, though. Her taste is so old-fashioned." Julian sat up in bed and reached for his phone immediately. He was expecting a wall of text from me, paragraphs of begging, screaming, or threats. He unlocked the screen and frowned. There was nothing. No missed calls, no angry emojis. The message he had sent the night before didn't even have a read receipt. He laughed, a dry, arrogant sound. "She hasn't even looked at it." He shouted out to Sienna. "She is probably curled up in a ball somewhere, too terrified to even unlock her phone. God, she is so weak." Sienna walked back in, holding 2 glasses of mimosa. "Are you sure she can't do anything legal? Like, sue us for the house?" Julian took the glass and took a long sip, his confidence swelling with every bubble that popped on his tongue. "Babe, I told you, I handled it," he boasted, puffing out his chest. Last week, that stack of papers she signed, she thought it was insurance. It was actually a waiver of spousal support and a quitclaim deed. She signed away her rights to everything. She walks away with nothing but her clothes. I am a financial genius. Do you really think I would leave loose ends? He didn't stop there. Fueled by his own ego, he dialed his college friend, putting the call on speaker so Sienna could hear how powerful he was. "Mikey." "Yeah." "Man, I did it," Julian crowed into the phone. I finally dropped the dead weight. "Yeah, Sienna is here. Life is good, brother. Listen, I'm heading into the office around noon. I'm going to fire that little assistant who was friends with Ilara. Clean slate. You know anyone loyal to the ex-wife gets the axe." He was king of the world, planning his day of firing people and spending money. When the doorbell rang, it wasn't a polite chime. It was a firm, authoritative buzz. Julian tapped the security app on his tablet. He saw the uniforms standing in the hallway. He didn't panic. He smirked. "Look at this," he said to Sienna, showing her the screen. "The police. $10 says Alara tried to kill herself or is causing a scene in the lobby. She is so dramatic. She probably sent them to do a wellness check." "Should we hide?" Sienna asked, looking at the mess of bottles. "Hide in my own house," Julian scoffed. "No. You sit there and look pretty. I will handle this. I will tell them she is crazy and get a restraining order filed by lunch." He grabbed a robe, my father's old robe, and tied it loosely. He walked to the front door with the swagger of a man who believes he is untouchable. He ran a hand through his hair, fixed his smile into something condescendingly polite, and swung the door open. "Officers," Julian said, his voice smooth and deep. "Good morning. I assume you are here about my ex-wife. Is she making threats again?" I can call my lawyer if he stopped. The smile froze on his face. The two officers did not smile back. They stepped aside, parting like the Red Sea. And there, standing behind the wall of blue uniforms, was not a weeping, broken woman. It was me, dressed in a sharp navy suit, standing next to Nana Rose, who was looking at him with the cold judgment of a grim reaper. The smirk slid off Julian's face like grease off a hot pan. He blinked, his eyes darting from the polished buttons of my navy suit to my face, which was not streaked with mascara as he had hoped, but set in a mask of cold, hard indifference. He opened his mouth to speak, to perhaps utter one of his condescending nicknames for me, but the words died in his throat when his gaze drifted to the woman standing at my right. Nana Rose did not look like the frail pensioner he had forbidden from entering this building. She stood tall, her chin lifted, flanked by the sheriff on one side and Marcus Thorne, no relation to Julian, the chief executive officer of Sterling Corp, on the other. The hallway fell into a suffocating silence, broken only by the distant hum of the elevator. Julian tightened the belt of his robe, his knuckles turning white. He decided to play the only card he had left, which was aggressive denial. "Who authorized this raid?" he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "This is private property. I am a director at Sterling Corp, and you are trespassing on my home in Alara. Why the hell did you bring that old woman here? Is this a joke?" Arthur Penhaligon stepped forward before I could answer. He adjusted his glasses and pulled a single, crisp document from his briefcase. "You are mistaken." "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, his tone as dry as dust. "This is not your property. This penthouse is owned by RS Holdings, a subsidiary of the Sterling Family Trust. You are merely a tenant on a conditional lease. And as of this morning, you are in severe breach of that contract." Julian let out a bark of incredulous laughter. He pointed a shaking finger at Nana. "Her," he spat. "You are saying the apartment belongs to her. That is hilarious. She lives in a slum. She lives on government checks. Where would she get the money to buy a place like this Marcus Thorne, the CEO whom Julian had spent years trying to impress?" Stepped forward. He looked at Julian with profound disappointment. "Julian," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous, "I suggest you show some respect. You are speaking to Rose Sterling. She is the chairman of the board. She is the one who signed your promotion letter 5 years ago. She is the one who approves every major asset acquisition in this state." Julian froze. He looked at Nana, searching for the lie, but found only the terrifying truth in her steely gaze. The color began to drain from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. Suddenly, Sienna appeared in the hallway behind Julian. She was still wearing my emerald green silk robe, holding a glass of orange juice. She saw the uniforms and the crowd, and her eyes went wide. "What is going on?" she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. "Julian, tell them to leave. This is harassment." "Alara, you cannot just break into our house." I stepped past the sheriff. I walked right up to the doorway, close enough to smell the stale alcohol on her breath. I looked her up and down. my eyes lingering on the silk fabric that was draped over her body. "That is not your house, Sienna," I said, my voice steady and quiet. "And that is not your robe. You are wearing my clothes, you are wearing my jewelry, and you are standing in the house that belongs to my grandmother." Sienna opened her mouth to argue, but the sheriff stepped in, blocking her view of me. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and turned his attention back to Julian, who was now leaning against the doorframe for support. "Julian Thorne," the sheriff announced, his voice booming in the confined space. "I have a warrant for your arrest. You are charged with corporate embezzlement, fraud, and grand larceny involving the theft of over $5 million from Sterling Corporation funds." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian looked at the sheriff, then at the CEO, and finally at Nana. The arrogance was gone. The bravado was gone. In its place was the raw, naked terror of a man watching the floor drop out from under him. $5 million, Julian stammered, his knees buckling. "No, I can explain. It was an investment strategy. I was going to pay it back Ilara. Tell them I am good for it." He reached out toward me, his hand trembling violently. I did not flinch. I just watched as the sheriff grabbed his wrist, spun him around, and slammed him against the doorframe to secure the handcuffs. The click of the metal was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from shocked silence to absolute chaos the moment the handcuffs clicked around Julian's wrists. He did not accept his fate with dignity. Instead, he began to thrash against the grip of the officers, his face twisting into a mask of desperate, ugly panic. He looked around the room, his eyes bulging, searching for a scapegoat, any scapegoat, to pin his crimes on. "This is a mistake," Julian screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "I demand to speak to my lawyer." It was the accounting department. They have been cooking the books for years. I tried to stop them. It wasn't me. He turned his wild eyes toward me, desperate to shift the narrative. "It was her," he shouted, nodding his head frantically in my direction. "Ilara, she has a spending problem. She forced me to take the money I had, to do it to keep up with her demands. Look at her. She is the one who wanted this lifestyle." I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed, watching him unravel. I did not need to defend myself. Nana Rose simply stepped forward, opening the leather folder she had been clutching like a weapon. She pulled out a stack of papers and held them up for everyone to see. "Is that so?" Julian Nana asked, her voice cutting through his shouting like a razor. "Because these are bank statements. They show monthly transfers of $20,000 from the company accounts directly into a private account registered to Miss Sienna Blake. And here are the audio recordings from the bug I planted in your office 3 months ago, where you explicitly brag about how easy it is to steal from the company. The mention of the money in the recordings hit the room like a bomb, but the shrapnel hit Sienna the hardest. The moment the words $20,000 and stealing left Nana's lips, the color drained from Sienna's face. She looked at Julian, not with love or concern, but with the dawning horror of a parasite realizing its host was dead. "Wait," Sienna said, her voice trembling. You stole the money. You don't own the company, Sienna. Baby, listen to me," Julian pleaded, struggling against the officer. "It is just a misunderstanding. I can fix this. We can fix this." Sienna's face contorted into a snarl of pure rage. She backed away from him as if he were contagious. "You liar," she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "You told me you were the president. You told me this house was yours. You told me you were worth millions. I will be," Julian cried out. "You are nothing but a fraud," Sienna yelled. She began frantically clawing at her hands. She ripped the diamond bracelet off her wrist, the one he had bought with stolen funds last week, and threw it at his face. It bounced off his cheek, leaving a red mark. She tore the ring off her finger and hurled it to the floor. I am a victim here. He lied to me. He told me he was divorced. I didn't know anything about the money. I am innocent. Julian stared at her, his mouth hanging open. The girl he had destroyed his marriage for, the girl he had called his soulmate just 12 hours ago, was now throwing him to the wolves to save her own skin. The betrayal broke something inside him. He slumped in the officer's grip, the fight draining out of him. Then, his eyes found mine. Desperation replaced the arrogance. He dropped to his knees, dragging the officers down slightly with him, the heavy thud echoing on the marble floor. Tears began to stream down his face, mixing with the sweat and the snot. It was a pathetic, disgusting sight. Ilara, he sobbed, his voice cracking. Ilara, baby, please, you have to help me. She bewitched me. I didn't know what I was doing. It was a moment of weakness. I love you. You are my wife. I did it all for us. I wanted to give us a better life. Please, tell them to stop. Tell them we can work this out. I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. I remembered yesterday. I remembered the cold look in his eyes when he told me to pack my bags. I remembered the text message that told me not to come home. I remembered how he had treated me like garbage for 5 years. And now, he was on his knees, begging the garbage to save him. You didn't do it for us, Julian, I said softly, my voice clear in the sudden silence. You did it for yourself. And now, you are by yourself. The sheriff signaled his men. They hauled Julian to his feet, ignoring his wails of protest. As they dragged him out the front door and into the hallway, the sound of the commotion had drawn a crowd. The neighbors, the wealthy socialites and businessmen Julian had tried so hard to impress were standing in their doorways. Phones were out. Flashes were going off. I could see the live stream interfaces on their screens. Julian Thorne, the man who cared more about his image than his soul, was being paraded in handcuffs, weeping like a child, while the world watched his reputation turn to dust. Officer, give me 2 minutes, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the hallway like a knife. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded to his deputies. They stopped dragging Julian toward the elevator, holding him firmly by the arms. Julian looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen, a flicker of pathetic hope sparking in his chest. He probably thought I was going to show mercy. He probably thought I was going to tell them it was all a big misunderstanding. I walked over to him, the heels of my shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. I stopped inches from his face. I could smell the fear on him. I did not yell. I did not slap him. I simply leaned in close, bringing my lips to his ear so that only he could hear the final nail being driven into his coffin. Do you remember the text you sent me last night? I whispered, my voice smooth and cold. You wanted a reaction. You wanted drama. Well, my silence was more expensive than any curse word I could have screamed at you. I pulled back to watch the hope die in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, but no sound came out. Get him out of here, I commanded. The deputies yanked him backward. Julian let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure despair, as the elevator doors slid open. He was dragged inside, still screaming my name, until the metal doors shut, sealing him away from my life forever. The silence that followed was heavy. I turned slowly to face Sienna. She was standing by the console table, shivering in my green silk robe, clutching her phone to her chest. She looked terrified, her eyes darting between me and the open door. Ilara, look, she stammered, taking a step back. I didn't know. I swear. I am a victim too. Arthur Penhaligon, our lawyer, stepped forward, blocking her path. Miss Blake, Arthur said, his tone devoid of warmth. "We are not pressing criminal charges against you today. However, you should know that a formal complaint regarding your unethical conduct has been filed with the state board. You are effectively blacklisted from working in the financial sector in this city. No reputable firm will hire you." Sienna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. You can't do that. My career. Your career ended the moment you decided to help a man embezzle funds. Arthur interrupted. Furthermore, the forensic accountants will be seizing all assets purchased with the stolen funds. That includes the car, the jewelry, the designer handbags, and the electronics. Sienna reached for a Louis Vuitton bag sitting on the chair. "Leave it," Arthur barked. "That is evidence. You leave with what is on your back. Nothing else. But I am wearing pajamas," Sienna cried, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And this robe. It's hers. Keep it," I said, looking at the silk robe with disgust. "I don't want it back. It has touched your skin. Just get out of my house. Now." Sienna looked at me, then at the stone-faced lawyer, and finally realized she had no moves left to play. She ran out the door, barefoot and sobbing, wearing a stolen robe and carrying the weight of a ruined future. As the door clicked shut, Nana Rose let out a long sigh. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Send in the cleaning crew." Nana ordered into the receiver, "I want a full sanitization. If they touched it, burn it. I want this place stripped to the bone. I want the smell of them gone by noon." I stood in the center of the living room. It was finally quiet. The chaotic energy of the morning had dissipated, leaving behind a vast, open space. I waited for the sadness to hit me. I waited for the heartbreak of losing my husband of 5 years. But it did not come. Instead, I felt a lightness in my chest, a profound sense of relief that made me want to laugh. By the afternoon, the story was everywhere. My phone buzzed incessantly with news alerts. The headlines were brutal and satisfying. Finance director falls in shame embezzlement scandal, exposes affair with heiress wife. Sterling Corp heir reveals secret identity in shocking raid. I sat at Julian's desk, my desk now, and opened the top drawer. There, sitting on top of a stack of files, was the divorce settlement he had drafted a week ago. He had written it to leave me with nothing, confident that I would sign it out of stupidity. I picked up a pen. I flipped to the back page. I signed my name with a flourish. "Arthur," I called out. The lawyer appeared in the doorway. "File these," I said, handing him the papers. He wanted a quick divorce. Let's give him one. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the Chicago skyline. This penthouse had been my dream project, but now the walls felt tainted. The memories here were painted over with lies. "Nana," I asked, not turning around. "Yes." "My dear, sell it," I said firmly. "Sell the penthouse. I don't want to live in a monument to a dead marriage. I am going to take the money and build something real." 3 months later, the sound of the judge's gavel hitting the wooden block echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap, signaling the end of the storm. Julian stood before the bench, his shoulders slumped in a cheap, ill-fitting suit provided by his public defender. The arrogance that had defined him for 5 years was completely extinguished. "Mr. Thorne, you are hereby sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny," the judge declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. Julian did not scream or beg this time. He just looked back at the gallery, searching for a friendly face. But the seats where his golf buddies and high society friends should have been were empty. They had abandoned him the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. He was alone, stripped of his reputation, his money, and his freedom. As the bailiff led him away, he looked at me one last time. I did not look away, but I did not smile either. He was no longer my husband. He was just a cautionary tale in an orange jumpsuit. Sienna did not fare much better. While she avoided prison time by turning state's witness against Julian, her social currency was bankrupt. The investigation exposed her history of targeting wealthy men, and she was swiftly blacklisted from every reputable company in the city. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had fled town and was working the night shift at a dive bar 2 states over, hiding from the internet fame she had so desperately craved. I did not return to the architecture firm immediately. Instead, I took the proceeds from the sale of the penthouse, a staggering sum that felt like reparations for my stolen years, and channeled it into a new passion. I opened a nonprofit center dedicated to helping women escape financial abuse. I wanted to ensure that no other woman would ever feel trapped because she did not have access to her own bank account. Nana Rose finally decided to rest. She officially stepped down as the active head of the Sterling Foundation, signing the controlling interest over to me. "You are ready, Ilara," she told me, patting my hand as we sat in her new room at the assisted living facility. It was a beautiful place with manicured gardens, far from the damp apartment we had shared. You were always the strong one. You just needed to remember it. That evening, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my new, modest apartment. I looked at the reflection. The woman staring back was not the tired, anxious housewife who hid in the bathroom to cry. She was a CEO, a survivor, and a warrior. The navy blue suit I wore fit perfectly, not just on my body, but on my soul. My phone buzzed on the vanity. For a split second, a phantom echo of fear pricked at my heart, a remnant of the nights I dreaded receiving a text from Julian. But when I looked at the screen, it was a message from a major property developer who admired my designs. "Ms. Vance, we would be honored if you would lead the design on our new city library project. When can we meet?" I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes. I did not reply immediately. Instead, I opened my contact list and scrolled down to the name that had caused me so much pain. Julian. I pressed the edit button. I scrolled to the bottom. My thumb hovered over the red text that read, "Delete contact. Goodbye, Julian," I whispered into the quiet room. "I hope you enjoy the silence." I pressed the button. His name vanished, erasing the last tether to a life that no longer fit me. I picked up my bag and walked out the door, stepping into the warm glow of the afternoon sun, ready to build a life that was entirely, unapologetically my own. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please comment down below with your location and let's share our thoughts on today's drama. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach and empower even more people.